Hello, it's Anastasia Melnik here with you, with an amazing journalist from Amsterdam, Netherlands, Hubert Smeets, and who is majoring in history, as far as I know, and political science at the University of Amsterdam, a journalist who is working also an editor and an author on several books on Russia, Russian history and politics. So I know that you were just back from Donetsk, from that part of Ukraine, when we have this really huge conflict right now. How would you describe the situation there? And would you say that media is covering it in the way it really is and as you saw it?
Now let's start with the last question.
Yeah.
I think that the situation over there on the ground is less tense than some media are showing. I think there is no civil war going on in the Donbass.
That's what Russia wants to show.
Yeah, but I think that's not true. I don't say that the situation is stable. I would describe it as lawless, as a kind of anarchy. Mm-hmm. It is absolutely not clear where are the law enforcement agencies, who is in charge of the big towns or the little cities. The police is invisible.
Did you see any police there?
Yes, I saw police at the street, not only GAI traffic police, but also ordinary police, for example, on the Victory Day last Friday. But the police was, for example, in Donetsk, not preventing that armed people organized the transport to Mariupol. So you can say it is a kind of anarchy, but at the same time, and that amazed me, and I was wondering about how it could. At the same time, I think civil society is going on. So people are living their lives and try to organize a kind of civil society on a basic level. To compare it with Amsterdam, my hometown, I think that in Amsterdam the chaos would be far greater and deeper.
If that would be a situation like
Donetsk,
that.
That great as Amsterdam at this moment, after 2 months of so-called
Anarchy,
civil
basically.
war.
But it's, as you said, it's not a civil war, and it's one of the misunderstandings that Russian media wants to put, all the world in. And what we can see in Russia today, for example, they're sometimes misleading the situation. That's what we heard from a lot of the journalists who were working, on the ground.
Yes, Russia today has, of course, I would say, because it's a state organization. It's not free journalism. It's state-led journalism. Is showing only, let's say, the administration in Donetsk, but they don't show that 200 meters further there is a kindergarten where people are playing with the grandparents, for example. Mm-hmm. Only 200 meters from the place where they are showing people with Kalashnikovs
and saying that they're fascists over there.
And that are all fascists all over there who are sent by the junta in Kiev. Now, that's not the case. When I was at referendum day, at the countryside, mm-hmm. I was also amazed that the people were, of course, talking about fascists, about the junta, about the illegal government in Kiev, but more they were talking about their own problems. Mm-hmm. About
what were the major problems that you heard about?
About the pensions, about the fact that there is no water for 20 hours a day, that electricity is falling out a few hours a day, that they are afraid that they have to work longer and not and cannot go to pension to their retirement when they are 55 years old, when they are working in the mines. To use a very old-fashioned word, at the countryside, where all the mines are almost on the fringe and the brink of bankruptcy, they are fighting a kind of class struggle. And they think that Kiev is their enemy in that class struggle, and that the oligarchs, even Akhmetov and for sure Yanukovych, are their enemies. But they are not talking only about fascism and Banderovцы in the west of Ukraine.
Would you say that's a great impact of Russian media? Of what plays the major impact of forming this identity and this problem setting in the eastern Ukraine?
I think so. I think that, to be honest, I think that the workers in the Donbass feel themselves more convenient with Russian culture than with Ukrainian culture. That's for sure. And of course, the television influenced them in that. That's for sure. But that doesn't mean that they are really thinking themselves only about in this kind of stereotypes. I think it's very important to understand also the social political component in this conflict in the East. And that is, I think, I don't know for sure because I was only for 1 week there, is misused by the separatists.
Would you say that this is a case of the informational war majorly? Because we can see that we have the same situation, for example, what we had in Odessa, and then we see the Ukrainian media and Russian media describing it really in a different way, and both have people who are telling these stories. So it's not that it comes without a people who would say, yes, it happened this or that way. How would you describe this situation?
So that's typical informational warfare that's going on always, by the way, when there is a political conflict. But I have to say, and I have to admit, that Russia Today is very professional made. And I have also to tell you the truth that Russia Today has also a big impact in the West at the moment. And because they are smart in making their programs, they have, let's say, they do it in an Anglo-Saxon way. And that's the way we in the West have learned to watch television the last 20 years. So that is very important. And the Ukrainian reaction on that is, to be honest, as far as I can understand, because my Ukrainian is very poor, not to say it's non-existent, as far as I can understand the Ukrainian media, they are, let's say, they are countering this propaganda warfare in a
Western society.
No, in an old-fashioned way. I think that it would be better that the Ukrainian media use the word terrorist a bit less, because that is for us in the West. I'm a Westerner, so
yes.
I don't want to mix
How
up.
do you perceive that situation personally?
In the East, you mean? I see it as a kind of.
You said not a civil war.
It's not a civil war. I see it as a kind. How you say it? I see it as a kind of hit and run guerrilla warfare on the side of the pro-Russian party, as I call them, because I cannot prove if there are Russians inside.
And what is the biggest difference, would you say, between those footages and that comments that Russia Today is showing, and between what you really saw in eastern Ukraine?
The Russia Today is only showing, let's say, standoffs between armed groups, between armed parties. They are only showing violence, let's say it in that way, and their their voiceovers are quite often not connected with the images they show. So the voiceovers are, let's say, are kind of propaganda which can be made every time without.
But Western media is still citing them. That's the thing.
Yeah, that's true, and that's what I try to explain to you. That it's done very professional, and when you are watching Russia Today in the West, you don't know, for example, that a footage was made 1 month ago. And it has nothing to do with the actuality of today's events. And if the voiceover is not saying that, then you are
You
lost.
really believe what's
happening.
happening.
You are lost as a viewer, that's for sure. You cannot blame the viewers in the West. But the main thing of Russia Today, I think, is that they never try to organize a kind of discussion, a kind of debate between different parties, between different views, and so on and so on. And I think that would be very important. Of course they don't do it, because it's not in their interest. But it would be very important because, to be honest, I think that we are underestimating the social and political aspects of this conflict. It's not about Russian culture. It's not about Russian language, I think.
But would you say that if that's not a problem of a language so far, because you could see how it going on in Kiev, for example, in eastern Ukraine, the problem with the language, it is non-existent because people were communicating whatever language they wanted. But would you say that's a problem of political culture, really?
Yes, it is political culture, and it is a problem of how they have, let's say, experienced their own history. To start with the last. My impression is that in the Donbass, they don't understand until now why they are not that privileged as they were during the Soviet Union. Why Donetsk is not more important than Rostov at the Don, as it was 25 years ago. So they are living in history. They think...
and looking back, what
they
they
are
were
looking back,
and comparing.
Yes, and for sure they are right, because their life was during Soviet power better than it is now. And they think that Russia could bring them back to the history.
To that state.
Yes. And that's nonsense, but it is a real belief. It's a real sentiment. And I think that's very important to understand. Otherwise, you will not understand that they in the Donbass feel themselves humiliated by the West in Ukraine. And that's, by the way, that's not unique for the Ukraine. Everywhere in the world, people from the province feel themselves humiliated by the cappuccino drinking, white wine sipping intellectuals and academics in the capital. That's everywhere in the world. It's in America between Main Street, in the Midwest and New York. It's even in the Netherlands like that, and it's also in Ukraine. But in the Ukraine, it's more political. And I would say it's very important to give attention to this subtext in the conflict. And the second conflict, but that's part of the first thing I said about nostalgia, about yearning for the past instead of looking to the future. The second thing is that I think there is a battle between two worldviews, two ideas about the future, between, let's say, a political system based on civil society and a political system based on how you say that, on
patriarchal.
Yes, a patriarchal system where the master, where the patron, as they say in France,
the greatest role in a political system.
Yes, and also in the social system, where people are subordinated to the boss. And that is, you can say, still the Russian system. In that way, there is a difference between the Russian culture and the Ukrainian culture, but deep down, it is a social political struggle about how to organize society, on civil society, or on a kind of old-fashioned hierarchical society, which is paradigmical.
Yes.
And that is, I think, the bottom line of the conflict, also in the East.
How would you describe your journalistic experience during all this time? Because I know that you were also reporting during the Euromaidan, and of course for you it is easier to look from the outsider kind of point of view, to look from the one side, one point of view and another point of view, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian. How would you describe it, and the difference maybe between reporting from Kiev? Because we had the same situation here in Kiev, where we had clashes in the center of the city, but outside, even if you go 200 meters above, there's people sitting and drinking their coffee.
When I was the first time here in the last 3/4 of a year, it was in September, and there was nothing going on. It was even the opposite. At that time, the government decided to join a European market and to sign an association treaty. In December, was the second time here, and at that time you could say that the revolution was a bit naive. It was a revolution of youngsters.
What was the naivety of this revolution, would you say, at the start?
At that start, it was, by the way, I liked it. It was also very, let's say, romantic. But it was apolitical. So it was a revolution of people who pretended that they could achieve their goals without involvement of old-fashioned politics and old-fashioned politicians. Now I think it's the opposite. Now I think the revolution is politicized in a very tough way, also in Kiev. But it's very difficult for me to be sure about this on this analysis. But in a way, it's politicized, and that makes that it's also polarized. And I think that could be a barrier for any kind of solution to keep the Ukraine united.
Through this period of time, from the beginning of the revolution, which you called romantic, until today, what we can see in eastern Ukraine and in the region, because it became obviously an international problem, what transformations or trends could you see? Because you studied, you majored in history and politics, so probably you could find something that could say what it all leads to. That's a tough one.
Yeah,
I know that's a tough one.
That's a very tough one, and I don't like journalists who think that they are prophets. Yeah, I'm not a prophet. I only can talk about what happened, and
Yes.
it's very difficult for me to talk about things that will happen.
But the transformation that you saw on the international level, the influence of different countries on the situation here, probably the influence of US, Canada, etc., like European Union too, their influence really changed during this period of time.
Yes, but on the other side, as I feel it here in Kiev,
Yes.
at least, there's also a kind of disbelief in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Because the European countries, and first and for all Germany, didn't deliver what
was expected.
what they promised in a way. So there is a kind of disappointment, I think, on the Ukrainian side, and for sure now Europe is more involved than Europe was involved 3 months ago, but still Germany is not delivering. Although the foreign minister was yesterday in Kiev and in Odessa, but I think that, and for sure, and everybody, I think, is telling the same and saying the same in Ukraine. The most important moment for an analysis about the future is the 25th of May. If there will be presidential elections in the east, more or less, not in Slavyansk and not in Kramatorsk perhaps, but in all of the other cities of the Donbass, if there will be presidential elections, it is not even important how many votes are posted for Poroshenko or for Timoshenko,
Yes.
or for the other candidates from the West. It's important that the Donbass can show a kind of civil order, and that the Donbass is able to organize
To maintain
more or less elections
really in the country.
in the country, and that is, I think, the main aim for the next two weeks. And if that will be the case, the 25th of May, then I think the position of Europe, the European Union, and also of the United States towards the Russian Federation will be quite different than now. Although the other side, the pessimistic side, the flip side is that if there will no elections in the East, serious elections in the East, there will be no serious coming out of the vote, Yavka,
Yes.
then the Russian Federation can keep the initiative.
But that would be a benefit of the Russian Federation.
Yes, for sure.
That's
For sure.
everything that they
For sure.
expected and planned.
For sure. And
What would you say would
Yeah,
be
but-
the reaction of the
Yeah.
West on that if that wouldn't happen, the election?
Oh, I'm not, in the context of the Ukrainian politics, I'm not very optimistic about that. I think in the end, the West and especially European Union will keep some distance to Ukraine in that case, because Russia is too important for European Union, especially for Germany, to spoil the relations with Putin. So I'm not very optimistic about that. But it is not as it was 4 months ago. The European Union is more involved in Ukrainian politics than it was a few months ago. So in that case, you can say that the Russian Federation didn't achieve what the Federation wanted, what Putin wanted, until now. There are a lot of people killed, for sure. They organized a referendum, plebiscite, or how you call it. They declare themselves independent, but you can also look to the bigger picture and you can say that it was not so easy as they thought, I think. It is not by accident that Putin didn't react until now seriously on the referendum. He is trying to keep his cards close to his breast.
Close.
And he is also not master of the game. Nobody is master of the game. That's exactly the case in Ukraine at this moment.
Would you say, what would you say the major problem for Ukrainian government right now and the Ukrainian journalists also to maintain the situation, you know, as good as we can until the presidential elections, just to make it, you know, resistant to all this informational war, political and economical pressure that Russia makes?
Yes, although I'm not very optimistic about that in the East, because there the Ukrainian television and the Ukrainian media in general are not influencing, I think, society at all, only on higher levels, on intellectual levels, for sure. But
which is minority.
That's the minority, and it's only in Donetsk. Let's be honest. Donetsk is a very developed city, but in Lugansk it's already different. So I wouldn't like to be all too optimistic about that, but perhaps it's easier than information and so on and so on. When the civil society in Donetsk and even in Lugansk and in Mariupol is continuing its life, when people are going to school, when people are still working, although they are afraid of losing their jobs.
And there are people in the street
and there
with
are people
guns.
So
no one can promise their personal security.
No, for sure. But you can also look at from the other side. There is no police on the street except from some GAI. It is absolutely not clear who is in charge. But the people are not killing each other. They are not plundering the shops. You can still buy food. Not in Slavyansk, but in the other places in the Donbass. So life is going on, and I think that is the main. You can say that's the main result the government in Kiev has achieved until now. Life is going on. There is no chaos. There's a lot of uncertainty for sure, but life is going on, and there is no chaos. And without chaos, what needs the Russian Federation? What needs Putin? First and for all, basically chaos, instability. And when life is going on, when civil society will not be destroyed the next 2 weeks, then I think that will be, let's say, a little victory for the government in Kiev and a little defeat for the government in Moscow.
Would you say that civil society and self-organization in the places where this situation is going on is the major thing that can help right now?
Yeah, I think it's more important than politics.
Really?
Yeah, perhaps I'm too westernized, and perhaps you think that I'm totally stupid and do not understand a damn thing about let's say Eastern politics. But I think
from what you saw, because you saw how it's all going on.
A basic level of civil society is in this situation more important than high level sophisticated politics or military operations.
Would you say that there is still any chance for unity between Eastern and, say, Central and Western Ukraine, just to make it remaining in the unity?
Yeah, in the context of a kind of decentralization or even federalization, I don't know for sure. That's too detailed for me to comment on. Yeah, to comment on. Yeah, for sure. But I think there's still a chance. Yeah, but let's say it's 50-50.
50-50. Okay, we'll finish up on this part. I just remind you that I had this amazing guest, journalist from Amsterdam, Netherlands today, Hubert Smeets, who majored in history and political sciences at the University of Amsterdam and worked as the editor of Central and Eastern Europe, specialist in this particular field, also an author of several books on Russia, Russian history. So we discussed this subject also as long as your experience. And thank you so much for giving footages and such a balanced reports on what's going on in Ukraine. Thank you. And we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Okay.